I'm Max. I'm a PGY4, and I wanted to use my senior lecture to go over something that I think does affect a lot of our patients, but which is maybe more on the social EM side of things, and does have some direct health impacts as well. So we can, oh, and I just wanted to acknowledge, I don't know if I have financial disclosures specifically, but I'm definitely biased here. So, um, you know, bear that in mind when you assess my lecture. We can start with a case. 78-year-old male, history of metastatic disease, hypertension, diabetes. He comes in with hip pain. He's been having trouble walking, but he is ambulatory. Um, and after you do a little bit more digging, you find out that the real reason he's here is because he recently lost his housing. He was staying with family in a basement apartment in Queens somewhere, and the family got evicted, and now he is scared to go to a shelter because he's 78 years old and has a lot of chronic medical problems. So this is unfortunately a common and becoming more common story. There has been obviously, so there was an eviction moratorium during the pandemic, and I wasn't able to find any good natural experiment studies that have been done. Hopefully some are underway, and if not, hopefully some will be underway of the health impacts or economic impacts of this kind of natural experiment of no evictions for a couple of years. But since then, evictions have been steadily rising in New York City, which has been concurrent with a rise in homelessness, difficult to separate from an influx of refugees and other people who are struggling with housing security, but evictions are definitely part of the contributing factor. I think it's obviously worth mentioning, given our patient population, that there are large racial disparities in housing insecurity. There's and housing insecurity, I just want to be clear, it doesn't just mean you're getting evicted. It also means what burden the economic impact of your housing costs have on you. And so they call it housing cost burdened would be you're spending over 30% of your income on rent, and severely cost burdened are people who are spending over 50% of their income on rent. And I was able to find that over 40% of New York City residents are cost burdened, and then I wasn't able to get severely cost burdened for New York City, but over 20% of New York State residents spend more than 50% of their income on rent. So those are the people who are kind of teetering on the edge of eviction at any given time, potentially, or losing their home. These are not equally distributed in the population. Hispanic households, over 55% are cost burdened versus 31% of households headed by somebody who identified as white. Somebody just sent me a nice, thank you, a reference. And African American households where 50% of households in New York City were cost burdened. Another group that's particularly vulnerable to this, as in our case, are older adults. New York City, we are better off than most places in the United States in that there are actually some limited protections for tenants here. For older adults specifically, one that you can talk to your patients about if they mention that they're in fear of being evicted or in fear of losing their housing, is the SCRIE program. This is a New York State program that is very limited, but at least in New York City, because of the population of people who are living in rent stabilized or rent controlled housing, does provide some protections, but they have to apply for it and they may not know about it. The requirements are that they have to have under $50,000 a year in income, spend over 1/3 of that income on their rent, and they are in a rent regulated unit. If they meet those requirements, they qualify to have their rent frozen at the current rate at age 65 or above. And then it will not go up. Now, if you're listening to this and saying, what is a rent regulated unit? These are apartments in New York City that fall either through being grandfathered in under the original rent regulation, which is 1974, and in a building that has 6 or more units. So if you think in this room, do I live in a building that was built before 1974? Does it have 6 or more units? Probably at least some of the apartments in your building are or were rent regulated. And those would be the apartments that this would apply to. Another program that I didn't put a link here to is called Right to Counsel. And that's a New York State law that was passed some years ago, in which classically the problem was that landlords can afford to pay for lawyers and most tenants cannot afford to pay for lawyers. And so tenants were often going to housing court unrepresented. And Right to Counsel establishes that tenants do in fact have, similar to defendants in a criminal case, have a right to a lawyer to represent them in court. Unfortunately, it's also an underfunded program and has not been as implemented as it should be. But you can direct patients to the Right to Counsel website. And I actually, while I was doing this, I think maybe I'm going to do a quick QI project to create a dot phrase for discharge to just provide some of these resources for patients. And that can link them to organizations that will provide the free counsel that they are entitled to if they end up in eviction proceedings. And that applies to all renters, not just older adults. All right. So that's just to talk about housing insecurity and evictions specifically. And I know that I think Drs. McDonough and Lee gave great talks earlier about kind of the history of how we got here and also addressing unhoused people and the specific health concerns around unhoused people in New York City. So I don't want to overlap with those too much. The other thing I want to talk about is going to be illustrated by case number 2. So you have an 11-year-old girl. She comes in, history of asthma, comes in for an asthma exacerbation. This is her 3rd visit since November last year. And mom notes that she gets exacerbations every winter and that their apartment is supposed to be heated, but often just doesn't get enough heat, or the landlord doesn't turn on the heat. And this has been a building-wide problem, and that she feels tends to bring on her daughter's asthma exacerbations. So I know you guys have seen this map a gazillion times. So this is a map of heat complaints, and we'll talk about how those are compiled shortly. But you can see that we are smack dab in the center of one of the areas of Brooklyn that has the worst problems with landlords not providing heat to their tenants. And you can also see that we live in one of the biggest clusters of asthma ER visits in the city as well. There is a lot of pretty good population level data and correlation, showing correlation between ambient temperature and respiratory illnesses. That's in both young people, old people, pneumonias, asthma exacerbations, and also other diseases as well. You have other contributing risk factors, such as, again, these are correlations between rodent droppings, cockroaches in the apartment, and respiratory illnesses. I do just want to, this is like senior lecture time. I want to put in a plug for one of my favorite movies. If you guys have ever, I highly recommend the movie Joe's Apartment. It's about a guy who inherits his grandmother's rent-controlled apartment on the Lower East Side in the mid-90s and has to band together with the cockroaches in his apartment to fight off the evil landlord. and it's a musical, and yeah, it's really, really great. Really, really awesome movie. Yeah, it's top-notch movie. Ratatouille is also one of my favorite movies. But yeah, you can see that this map also correlates with the respiratory complaints that we were discussing earlier. And there's again, evidence showing, the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology does show that there's a correlation between allergen, pest and allergen exposure and asthma exacerbations, especially in urban environments, particularly. So I think often we see this same map over and over. I want to talk a little bit about what we can do for our patients in these situations and where to start. So sometimes you have patients who aren't even aware that they have any rights as tenants in New York City. The one place to start is telling them to call 311. This establishes evidence. The city will ideally send an inspector to come and measure the ambient temperature, check for rodent droppings, check for mold. In the case of scaldings, which we sometimes see in children, for example, sometimes the water is too hot, right? Sometimes the apartment is too cold. Sometimes the water is coming out too hot to the degree that it can burn kids, adults as well, but more often kids. And they will actually come and measure these things and have some objective data to provide. In addition, landlords do get fines for these violations. They sometimes rack up a lot of fines and don't pay them necessarily, but it does start the process if nothing else has, if the patient hasn't tried anything yet to address issues with their living situation. But let's say a patient tells you, oh, I call 311 every week. They come, they say that there's a violation, nothing ever happens. What to do next? Interact with your neighbors. If you're being affected, I'm speaking to the patient here or to you, you're not most likely not the only person in the building being affected. In fact, you might not even be the only person under the same management company being affected. And I just want to show a cool tool. This, by the way, is one of my favorite kids' books called Swimmy. And it's about solidarity. It's can you guys see? Yes. Can we? So I don't know if anybody, I'm happy to do my address, but if anybody is curious and wants to shout out their address, especially if you live in a building that might fall under these regulations, can find some cool info for you. Anybody landlord troubles? Yeah, go for it. 458. 458 East 29th. Okay. So this is a tool called Just Fix NYC. Oh, where's my mouse? And, oh, I can't actually see what we're seeing here. But what you can see over here is you get to see not just a bunch of cool data about your building. So your building actually probably does not fall under rent stabilization because there's only 4 units, right?
No, it is rent stable.
It is rent stable. Okay, so maybe for certain tax breaks that they might have gotten. Also, if the building was built in 2015, it's a whole different. So that means that your landlord is getting free money from the city.
As long as I'm not paying it.
You are paying it just through your taxes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's how they're being required to have rent stabilized units. That's a special case. Sometimes it is a time limited situation. So
yeah, it runs out in 2030.
There you go. So so those are actually a little different from some of the older and stabilized units, but do provide some protections, at least in the short term. So you can actually see then if you're having issues with your landlord and you only have 3 neighbors, your landlord also owns all these other buildings, and some of them have a lot more units, and they may also have issues with the same landlord. So I did this. Turned out that I have a really big landlord, owns lots of units, and they had thousands and thousands of violations accumulated over the years. And actually, here, I can close this now. And it also provides lots of other cool data, like what year your building was built, the sale data history, which is often really important in finding out these things, because you can find out when your building was sold and to who, and to different limited liability corporations that can, I'll get into why that might be important, declare bankruptcy and try to not address things, and different ways that landlords can avoid culpability. But the thing I want to emphasize is encourage patients to meet their neighbors, know their neighbors. Sometimes there's already a tenant association in their building. There's some value just in having community alone. For example, especially for vulnerable elderly patients, being part of any kind of community can be valuable. But sometimes being in a community with the people who live directly above, below, across the hall from you can be really important for people who may need help under any circumstances. So that's sort of the basic level of organization here would be like a tenant association in your own building. And then there are both neighborhood level and city level unions of tenant associations, which you could call tenant organizations. The one I wanted to point out is, so this is called the full-time tenant union. And this is actually a union of tenants of my management company. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of buildings under their portfolio, and they're so bad that that enough people became interested to form a organization specifically for this one landlord. But more commonly, you'll see neighborhood-based organizations. The one that'll probably be most relevant to us would be the Flatbush Tenant Coalition. These are sometimes independent, sometimes these are funded by NGOs. But generally what they do is they'll have set meetings where people can go or call into, and both receive advice on specific situations, and then also use the larger resources of the sort of the pooled resources of the group to address things at a larger scale. So what does this actually look like? Say our tenant who got it, or say let's speak to the mother with the patient who keeps getting asthma exacerbations due to the cold. I keep calling 311. Nothing is happening. Landlord isn't responding. Turns out I have other tenants in the building who are experiencing similar issues. We formed a tenants association, and now what? So you go to Flatbush Tenant Coalition, you send a representative, you discuss your specific problem. You may get advice such as, here's a lawyer that we know because other tenants have faced similar issues, who's really good about bringing cases. Or here's a letter writing campaign we can engage in. Here's a reporter that we know who can come to your building and highlight a particularly egregious story. It sometimes makes for good news and can bring some attention to a case. And sometimes it means things like organizing protests in front of landlords' offices or management companies. And it also provides a wider network of mutual aid, say, bringing a heater to somebody's apartment, bringing older people food who are having trouble with food security. It just kind of pools the larger communities' resources in ways that especially more vulnerable tenants will probably find useful. Um, so, and so, yeah, another organization I've been involved with, the Crown Heights Tenants Union. It's in our neighborhood. And these are like different. For example, Flatbush Tenant Coalition is funded through a like NGO type organization. Crown Heights Tenants Union is completely independent and just sort of like democratically organized. So there's different approaches to this. Met Council on Housing is primarily Manhattan based, but is one of the oldest organizations in the city. And there are umbrella organizations as well, like Housing Justice for All, which can organize things like sending buses of tenants up to Albany for lobbying days, for example. This is one I was just in San Francisco, Oakland recently, and saw a cool flyer, I thought, for a tenants association in Oakland. So that's just a picture I took. And then, you may ask, well, how does it actually work if you want to sue your landlord? Generally, you're going to want to do this as a group, although people certainly do it themselves. I can bring like a personal story here. We moved into a building, I don't know, some years ago now. They were already experiencing a lot of problems with their landlord. There was already an established tenant association. We connected with the Crown Heights Tenants Union, who in turn connected us with lawyers and reporters. And we had like a New York Times article about the young nurse mother with a kid with cerebral palsy across the hall, cystic fibrosis across the hall, who kept getting pneumonias in the setting of not having heat in her apartment, and was also being rent burdened and having to miss days at work because her kid kept getting sick, eventually lost her job, eventually got evicted from her apartment. And in her case had to move to Florida before this case sort of resulted. But put together a lot of data through different apartments, and it was really important to have different apartments and have this association on board. Sued the landlord, got $1 million settlement. Landlord then declared bankruptcy, dissolved the LLC, sold LLC. Anyway, we have not gotten any money, and I don't think we will get any money. But in the meanwhile, at least the conditions in the building temporarily got somewhat better. And we did protect a number of older tenants who were facing eviction from getting evicted. So that was really a positive. There were multiple positive outcomes out of this, despite people not necessarily getting financial benefits from this. That said, if you are suing for, and this is just to throw in some incentives here, financial disclosures. If you find out that you're being overcharged, you can actually get triple damages back for the dollar amount that you were being overcharged for however long it was. So highly encourage both patients and you, if you're living in a potentially rent-regulated apartment, to check your rent history, see when it jumped up, and see if that was done legally or not, because in many cases it was not. And you may be entitled to compensation. And again, right to counsel here. In some cases, right to counsel is going to be from the city, but there are also a number of non-governmental organizations that can provide really good quality lawyers to help with these cases. Especially, again, if it's not on an individual basis and it's being done as a class action or larger suit. All right. Some take-home points. No surprise, poor housing quality and housing insecurity are associated with poor health outcomes. New York City has better infrastructure than most places to address this, and it's still pretty bad. But there are a lot of resources that we can provide patients, and connecting patients with tenant organizations beyond just the sort of statutory legal resources that they have can help connect them to those resources and also provide them with community that can be valuable in and of itself. Yeah. Also, originally this talk was going to be about general life hacks of living in New York City. I decided not to do that, but one that is like peripherally related to this is if you have roof access in your building, you should definitely Google nycmesh.net and get yourself free internet that is just as fast as Comcast or anything else. And you get to do it in a way that hides your IP address and protects your privacy. And you'll have a bunch of cool nerds come over to your house and install a little satellite dish thing on your roof. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I'm just really happy with my free anarchist internet. Great. I donate $20 a month because I think they're cool, but you don't have to. And that is it. These are my references. I do want to take time and just like thank my coworkers, which is how I think of all you guys. It's been really, really great to be in this community. I've always been a person that does not like the idea of calling work family because I think it can be exploited, but this is as close as I'll ever get. So you guys are great. Thank you.